Hello, everybody. My name is Janice Gerbrandt, and you're here with the Professional Development Virtual Group for PASS. Today we have Mohammad Darab, and he's going to be speaking to us today about 3 keys to successful consulting. Just before we get started with that, I'm going to run through just a couple slides. You may have heard of PASS Summit, and this year, where it's being held in early November in Seattle. With the first wave of general sessions has been announced, so the pre-cons and the first wave of general sessions. So if you haven't checked them out, you should do that. And PASS has a couple of marathons, virtual marathons coming up. The first one is about migration, specifically getting you off SQL Server 2008 if you're unfortunate enough to still be on that. And the other one is the new world of data privacy. So I would encourage you to check those out online, register. PASS has lots of virtual groups offering a variety, a very diverse collection of webinars. Here's just a sample. I'd like to draw your attention to the professional development session that we have coming up on the 22nd. It's called Taking Back Control of Your Work Using Kanban, being presented by Michael Johnson. And on this slide, there's another professional development virtual group webinar called How to Build a Book of Business for Consultants by Blythe Morrow. There's lots of virtual groups with different topics, so if you haven't checked out lately what's available, maybe you want to see if there's something else that suits you, sign up and get notifications of upcoming webinars. And also there's SQL Saturdays held around the globe. Here's a sample of some that are happening, either just happened or about to happen. We've got everything from Brisbane to Dallas. And PASS is a fantastic community to be a part of. Lots and lots of free learning and a great way to network. Here's a few different ways to get in touch with PASS. And I'm going to turn the cameras over to Mohammad. And when we while I'm doing that, I just want to remind you that you can ask questions throughout the webinar, and I will hold on to them and pass them on to our speaker as is appropriate, and I may save them right up to the very end. So if you don't hear your question right away, don't fret. It'll happen. So I think you have the controls now. Yeah.
Awesome.
So thanks very much for signing up, everybody, and thanks, Mohammad.
My pleasure.
Mute myself.
My pleasure. I just wanted to, hopefully everybody can hear me. This is my first time doing it virtually, so I normally am in front of people and I know that they're listening to me, right? Or at least can hear me. So let me make sure that you all can see the main slide deck. Awesome. So thanks for everybody. The title of this one is 3 Keys to Successful Consulting, How to Make the Mind Shift. Again, my name is Mohammad Darab. My little company there is Maytech LLC. And one of the reasons why I started this specific topic to talk about is when I was starting out my business, I didn't have really issues in terms of how to start a business or LLC versus sole proprietorship and those technicalities. The issues that I had was more mental, meaning issues with, do I know enough, right, to go into consulting, going from let's say a production DBA who goes to their job to all of a sudden being my own, the owner of the business, the person, the face, the business development, everything in one. It was kind of a hurdle to kind of go over, but I couldn't find a session that addressed that. And this is why I created this one. So again, thanks everybody for joining. And if you have not read the abstract, just to confirm, this session is not going to be about, again, the technicalities of how to brand yourself or how to start a business. Even I'll be more than willing to address those. You can contact me later. This is specifically on how to make the mind shift, which I believe is the most important thing, is getting in the right mind shift and also having that the continuous motivation, right, to going down this entrepreneurial path. So with that being said, a little bit about myself. I am from DC. I was actually born in DC. A lot of people do say they're from DC, but they're kind of from the outer suburbs. I'm actually born in DC. So I have close to 20 years of IT experience. and about half of that was SQL Server. This year, I'm actually honored to be part of the IDERA ACE class, and all that means is I'm sponsored, so any event I do, I'm sponsored by the company IDERA, and that being said, I wanted to also thank them for just their sponsorship and the things that they do, and also the tools that they provide. Online, you can find me at mohammeddarab.com. I'm pretty active on my blog, and mainly on Twitter in terms of social media at MW So a quick factoid or a tidbit, I put this in here for a reason. I have interviewed over 40 experts in the SQL Server community. These are MCMs, MVPs, individuals that work on the Tiger team for Microsoft, SQL Server Tiger team. And you can read about those, each individual interview there, listed right there, mohammeddarab.com/interviews. And the reason why I have this in this professional development session is because the questions that I asked them were non-technical, right? And one of the questions I asked them, I refer back to a future slide. So I just wanted to leave this here in case you wanted to go visit that again, /interviews. So the goal, briefly mentioned this in the beginning, the goal is to share techniques that I've learned that have helped other people to help you. So if you're there right now and you're sitting in your cube and you're interested in kind of going down this path of starting your own business, but you're kind of hesitant, right? You see it as a big kind of learning curve or a bunch of mental hurdles to kind of overcome. Hopefully the goal of this presentation is to help you overcome them, right? And take control and actually pursue down that path, right, of entrepreneurship. So now, as the subtitle says, How to Make the Mind Shift, this is a great book. And if you're into self-improvement and kind of bettering yourself or finding new ways to kind of overcome obstacles that you might face, this is a great book, Mindshift by Barbara Oakley. And she's a PhD. And in the book, she mentions the word Mindshift as a deep change in life that occurs thanks to learning. So that's pretty much what we're going to be tackling. And again, I highly, highly recommend this book. So the 3 keys to successful consulting, right? One thing I wanted to say straight off the bat is these keys I have put in a specific order of importance. And of course, those are for obvious reasons. And not that one is, let's say, more important, but they kind of hand off the other, right? So it's kind of like having a strong base and then everything you build on top just is as strong as the base. So the very first key is a belief system, is believing in yourself. And the reason why I have this as number 1, a lot of you all probably already know, is that if you don't believe in yourself, no one else will, right? And it's very, is as they say, easier said than done. And whether it's your mom, your dad, or your loved one, a friend that has said this to you, throughout your lifetime, if you don't believe in yourself, no one else will. It's, again, easier said than done. I myself, I have a 5.5-month-old and have a 5.5-year-old boy. And I catch myself doing the same thing that my parents used to do to me. You get down on one knee and you kind of get to their level and you're saying, it's okay if you can't kick straight in your Taekwondo class or you can't get the bike, keep doing it, practice, believe in yourself and this type of stuff. And you see the enthusiasm that you're building in your child in this small example. But the issue is, as you're getting older, those people it might not be around, right? And you might start facing other things, and something as simple as believing in yourself starts to kind of get in the back of your mind, right? And it's kind of buried some way down there, and it becomes very, very hard. So that's why I have that as number 1. And another thing is, a lot of people that I've spoken to, they have great ideas. They're so passionate about the ideas. Whether it's just as a makeshift example, let's say baking, right? If they want to get into baking, but they've never baked before, but they've seen Cake Boss and they've seen Cupcake Wars and all these different cooking shows, and all of a sudden they really like the idea of maybe starting their bakery, right? The beautiful thing about it is you can always start your business. It doesn't mean that it will necessarily be successful, but the process of getting to that state to actually start a business is very, very crucial, right? So you can actually, during the rough times, stick with it. But I've had people contact me and they're talking. I have an ex coworker of mine actually a couple years ago had a beautiful idea to start a business. And once we started talking about why don't you pursue that, why don't you kind of, it's as easy as, going to the IRS website and creating the EIN and start having a plan. The one thing that she said was, I don't know enough, right? I need to, she said something like, I need to learn it before I do it, right? But it wasn't necessarily just learn it. It was learn everything. Like, she just had this mentality that she had to learn A to Z, because when you, as a consultant, go into a client and you say, I don't know, or you cannot provide a solution, initially it can be very daunting and like, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to go back to my regular DBA job or whatever job it is that you do and get my steady income paycheck, and that's it. I won't actually take that risk. So this leads me to the imposter syndrome, right? For those people who are not familiar with it, I have the definition right there: persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has legitimately achieved as a result of one's own effort. And pretty much it comes down to, no matter how smart you may be, right, how technically smart or whatever that you specifically do, how smart, there's still this voice inside you, or this type of, a feeling that whenever you get an accolade or somebody comes down to you, pat you on the shoulder, you still feel like, nah, I'm gonna be found out as an imposter. I'm fake. It's not really me. It's something else, right? And when I first heard about this imposter syndrome, which actually was just a couple years ago. I mean, I know some people have known this for years, but I actually found out about it just a couple years ago doing research for this. And I was like, oh my God, this is actually a thing, you know? But when I actually came across it, it's more, I guess, common than you think. So here's a study, and I guess I can have this as a pop quiz, and if there's anybody that wants to kind of chime in there with their thoughts. Let me go back here. So research studies show that at least blank percent of people will have an episode of imposter syndrome in their lifetime, right? So if you really think about it, I put the choices there, and whenever I do this talk on at a SQL Saturday, it's kind of funny, but yeah, 15%, 30%, 40%, or 70%, right? I give you a second to kind of think about that. And by the way, this is at least blank percent will have an episode, just one episode of imposter syndrome in their entire lifetime. So let's see, 70%. So when I first saw that, as they say, my jaw dropped, right? Like at least 70%. That was mind blowing. But I was actually like reading the study and seeing the number is 70%. By the way, if there's any study that you come across that is like, whether you're on Yahoo, Google News, or whatever, and you're doing your normal like perusing of the internet, and you come across any study that is 70% blank of whatever, I don't know about you, but I have to click on that link. I have to see what that is, because if it's 70%, in my mind, I'm like, most likely that I'm part of that 70%, even though I don't even know what it's about, right? But if it's like 1% of, I don't even bother, right? But this is specific to human beings. So 70% of people have an episode of imposter syndrome. There's actually two things that popped out to me when I saw that. I don't know if you all can pick it out, but there's two things that popped out about the study, and we're going to review that right here in bold. So number one is at least 70%. So again, I don't know about you all, but to me, at least 70% is more like 100%, right? Or like 99.9%, unless you're some robot, right? That's number one. Number two is have an episode, one episode. That to me, that's like, when was the last time you only had one negative thought about anything, right? If you have one, if it comes in your mind once, most likely it'll come again 2, 3, 4, 5, and it just keeps coming in, right, until you take care of it, right? Especially if it's negativity, because negativity has this type of trait of just lingering around, right? Being lazy and that negative voice, don't worry. I mean, it's very hard to overcome that, right? So just to have one episode, that also popped out. So this next slide I want to show you is my version of what I really think it is. A research study showed that at least 99.9% of people will have multiple episodes of imposter syndrome in their lifetime, right? Again, just a joke, but that's how I see it, right? Um, the good thing is that this isn't a some type of like genetic disease or something grave. It's just a state of mind. It's something that can be beat, right? Then the question becomes, how can we beat it, right? I'm not talking about Michael Jackson, which I actually wanted to put his little picture up there, but given the stuff about him recently, I decided against that. But again, how to beat imposter syndrome, right? And by beat, since it is the mind and we always have negative thoughts because we're all human beings, right? By beat it, I mean overcome it, right? How do we control it? How do we subdue it? How do we pretty much control it, right? And if you can control something like that, you have beat it. So again, talking with people, even myself, right? And yes, talking to myself, right? I came up with a type of methodology that I hope is as simple as can be. That if we practice and implement, it has definitely helped me. And it has helped a couple of people that I know hugely. And I hope that it also helps you. And I put everything in a way, in a type of method. I broke it down, and I call that method the ACE method, right? And I promise you, I did not come up with the the acronym first and then fill in the blanks. I actually was thinking about it, that we need to analyze our thoughts, right? Convert negative thoughts to positive, and then educate ourselves in that specific order, right? Again, I try to break it down as simple as possible, so it's something that we can digest and then implement, right? So like if I come and do something that is so overly complicated, like a 15-step process, a blah, 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 by the time you shut this webinar off, you'll forget it, right? The ACE method, try to keep it as simple. So let's kind of dive into each one of these. And by the way, just to note that we are still on the very first key, which is the belief system. I mean, that's very, very important. And the majority of the time I will be spending on this. So the A, well, obviously we need to analyze our thoughts, right? And since again, we are human beings and we always think, this is a constant cycle, right? This is a constant analysis phase. And then something called metacognition, which is thinking about thinking, right? This is very, very huge. Not that many people do that. It's kind of like being your own shrink in a way, where you have to think about thinking. And whether, and however you do that, I mean, I know there's some people that they wake up early in the morning, right? When it's peace and quiet, they meditate, they pray, they do yoga, right? They actually write down their thoughts early in the morning, or whether it's late at night, or whether it's a specific time of the day, right? To get the process of getting what's in there that is negative, right? These again thoughts that, and as I mentioned down there, the problem isn't the fact that we think negative thoughts, because everybody does that. Everybody thinks negative thoughts. Is once it starts to become a barrier from doing something positive, and let's say going down your entrepreneurial pursuits, right, and path, then it becomes an issue, right? It takes further analysis to figure out, is it really legitimate to think that, right? Is that fear really necessary, right? So for me, I like to write it down. And the reason why I like to write it down is because if I look back a week from now, and I look back at my journal and I say, oh, I used to think, for example, like, oh, I don't know, index tuning, for example, for those who are SQL Server DBA, right? Index performance tuning, and I'll write that down. And that's a negative thought, right? Oh, I don't know that, and I'm not gonna, go down the path of, let's say, saying that I can do any type of index performance tuning. I write that down. Then throughout the next couple of days, however long it takes, again, that's based on your schedule. Then I can go back and say, oh, actually, last week I didn't know it. This week I do, right? But the problem is, if I don't write anything down, at least specifically for me, I tend to forget a lot. I'm a parent, okay? And I'm getting up there in terms of age, might not look like it, but I'm getting up there, and I find myself starting to, some things start to slip my mind, and I, as a side note, whenever my wife hates that, so every time she tells me to do something, I just kind of joke with her. I'm like, I forgot you said that, but anyway, so it's a good habit to write things down. But however you want to do it, very important for you to do that. the next step is the convert phase, right? Or the conversion phase. So once we have these things written down, then we have to put it into a positive framework, right? Again, these negative thoughts always happen, but the ones that prevent us from doing something positive, in this case, consulting or going down the path of entrepreneurship, or let's say, even if it is public speaking, like let's say what I'm doing right now, obviously is virtual, but I have done a handful of SQL Saturday events. And the very first one I did, by the way, last year was Orange County. The very first time you public speaking ever, people were saying, hey, you should start out at your local user group and this and that. I made the mistake of thinking, oh, I'll just go all the way, because I'm from DC. So I made the mistake of going all the way out to the West Coast, and who cares? Nobody knows me, right? So if I mess up, nobody will know me. But I forgot a very important fact, that I had interviewed over 30 some people at the time in the SQL Server community, and a handful of them were at the event. So it was kind of like, oh, hey, how are you? It's me, the guy who interviewed you last year. But that didn't work out so well. But it put me in a place of that now I know I could do it, right? So the conversion, again, a constant cycle. Uh, uh, you know, um, we're going to address more about this in terms of a few examples. Oh, there we go. So who doesn't love cookies? All right. And it took me a while to find this picture. I really love chocolate chip cookies, and I have to put this in here because I want to tell you a little story, a brief story about how I overcame something that to me was not necessarily business related, but more of a, in my view, a grander scale. So a little story. I got married 10 years ago. My wife is from Ohio, and she has a daughter. At the time was 8 or 9 years old. Now she's 19, living with us. But when I got married, her and her daughter moved in to DC. So they all drove down. We all moved in, and here I am now. Just last week I was single, and now I'm married. Not only am I married, but now I'm a father, right, of an 8-year-old girl. And for all the parents out there, if you have kids that are older than 8 or 9 years old, you know that age range at 8, 9 it's a very, at least from my experience, it's a very lovely, bubbly, exciting phase, right? They're so innocent. They love to play and all this type of stuff. And here again, here I go, and here's this little beautiful girl who wants to just play around and joke around and just have fun. And she gets into watching baking shows, like I mentioned in the beginning, like Cake Boss, and they were huge back in the day, or at least for us they were huge. So we started watching these. Now I'm sitting there thinking, here I am, I was single, married, perfect, cool. But now I'm watching Cake Boss. I don't like baking, right? I don't like to bake. Again, I cannot bake. That was my negative thought. But the problem was that my daughter, she started to ask me to bake, right? And it's very hard, again, as a parent to tell a 8 or 9-year-old no, right, in terms of something like this, right? But I had this quote unquote epiphany, like it's like, here I am now being a father figure, like as you say, thrust into the limelight of being a father to an 8-year-old, 9-year-old girl, and she wants to bake. At the time, I remember thinking, I can't bake, right? But I kind of sat back, and I also talked to my wife. I was like, this is actually be a great opportunity, right? To not necessarily learn how to bake per se, but to build a stronger bond with my daughter, right? I mean, putting myself in her shoes, right? She comes in and here's a stranger guy who's going to be her dad now, right? So the best thing that I can do at the time was say, let's bake, right? So here I am, and of course, again, for the parents, the little girl, what does she do? She has me put on her tight little pink apron and all these flowers. I mean, I couldn't even like move my, I felt like the Hulk, right? And as skinny as I am, right? I felt like the Hulk. And I can't tell you how many batches of cookies I burned, how many cupcakes that I thought would be fluffy ended up like dense, like cake. It was just like the worst, right? But the whole process was positive for me because I can't tell you how many times my daughter was like just enjoying it, laughing. I mean, just getting messy. And I started to realize the whole point of baking for her wasn't the baking per se or eating a cookie. It was like to see me act silly. And that's how we built the bond, right? And we kind of started that from the beginning. And it was kind of funny, like I'll I'll make a batch of cookies. I knew they were going to be horrible. So I just, at the end, I'm like, okay, the cookies are done, but here's a box of like Oreos, because You're going to need them. Um, so as an example, you have something negative, right? Try to write it down and look at it from a positive point of view, right? So we take this negative example as I cannot bake. How do we turn that positive, right? So initially we can just say, oh, I can bake, right? You just take the cannot, which is negative, you make it can, you can do it, right? But that's still kind of like the Nike phrase of just do it, right? Okay, right? But let's make it more specific, right? Let's give a boundary to our negative thoughts when you make them positive, right? Put some type of time limit on it, some type of boundary that'll force us to do it, right? Otherwise, if you're as lazy as I am and I just say I'm going to do it, I'll probably never do it, right? And as an example, right? If I'm working at my cube and I'm just a DBA or whatever, right? Just sitting there working, and my boss comes to me from behind and she says, hey, I need you to do this report, right? Again, I don't know if you're like me, but the first question I'm going to ask is, when do you need it by, right? And if she says, whenever, right? And there's no time limit, guess what? I'm not doing it, right? I go back to like surfing the internet or whatever, right? Now, if you put some time limit to it and she comes up to me, she says, I need this report. And I say, when? And then she says, by end of today or by tomorrow, then things start to get prioritized and the job will get done, right? So we kind of want to tell ourselves and pre-program ourselves that, hey, whatever negative thought it is that I get and I want to convert, I got to attach a boundary to it and make that something that I can actually do, right? And in a way, kind of trick yourself into feeling guilty if you don't, right? Because the whole point is to do. And in this case, let's say learn to do something, right? And the last is educate. So once you get in this mindset of you got the negative thought to positive, you put a boundary to it, a time limit to it, then you educate yourself. Now the mind is open, right? Can take information. If you are in this state of, oh, I can, and you just kind of cram things and you still haven't really accepted the fact that you need to put a boundary and set up your schedule where you allow for this information to settle in, it's not going to work. I mean, there are, of course, people on there that are like Johnny Five and that can read like, 1,000 pages a second and all of a sudden they're geniuses. That's great. But the majority of people probably not like that, So if you're not like that, like me, this is the best way that I found that helps. So understanding that the more that we learn, right? And no matter how minuscule the chunk of information that we learn, doesn't matter. Whether it's small, it's big, does not matter. That our confidence will also increase with that amount of knowledge that increases, right? Because at one point you thought that you didn't know. Your journal is full of these negative thoughts, right? If you're writing it down. And now you start to see that you're learning these things, right? And maybe you look back a week or a month or 6 months, whatever the time frame is, and you see your journal is full of something like, for example, in my case, in my little example, I cannot bake, right? But if I look back now, I don't have those thoughts because I can bake, right? Because I've been doing it. And the more you'll believe in yourself. And remember that learning takes time, right? People that I've spoken to, and even myself, I have a tendency of being like this. Like if I can't learn it fast enough, I start to feel like I'm dumb, right? Or like there's something wrong with me if I can't pick it up within like 5 minutes or an hour or even a day, right? And it's very, very crucial to understand that when you're in this process of educating yourself and learning, do not compare yourself to anybody else. Only compare your present self to your past self. I can't stress that enough. I mean, that is huge. There was this guy, again, an ex-coworker of mine. Well, the funny thing is, when I used to be a full-time DBA, and then once I, dabbed into consulting, of course, we still keep in contact, right? They're all friends, and they get curious. So they start telling me their ideas, and then I kind of, through email and through phone calls and texting, it's like, oh, well, why don't you pursue this and that? And I got this one guy said that, well, he had one person he was comparing himself to who was very successful in this area that he wanted to get into, and he pretty much didn't pursue it because he could never be like that other person who's, the main guy in the business or the. I told him, I said, listen, man, the only way that you're going to get even remotely into anything is don't compare yourself to anybody else. Now, you can look up to people, you can have mentors, right? But once you start to compare what you know in your head to someone else, That's where the problem begins, right? The only thing you should be comparing up in here is what was in here, let's say, yesterday, right? Or last week. And the only one question you should be asking yourself is, do I know more now than I know yesterday? Or again, the past? If the answer is yes, perfect path, right? Keep doing that, right? If not, then it becomes an issue, right? So going down this path, and by the way, that's my drawing. If anybody wants to pay for my skills. And the funny thing is, when I drew this, I was like, let me just draw a guy doing this, which one, right? And my son came up to me, I was like, hey, look, your dad drew this little picture of me, and he's like, oh, Dad, you forgot something. I was like, what is that? And he's like, the little 3 hairs in the back that's sticking up. I'm like, what? Because apparently I started looking at all the pictures that he draws of himself. They're like 3 hairs sticking up. So I just said, okay, fine, I'll put that on there for you. But anyway, so then the question becomes, is it better to be a generalist, right? Or a specialist, as they say, jack of all trade, or a specialist, right? In consulting. So, and I actually did a SQL Saturday Phoenix last week, and one of the attendees at the end, she came up to me. She brought something very interesting up to me. She mentioned a book. I believe the name of the book was Strengths Finder, and maybe you all have heard of it. If not, I highly suggest you also pick that. I mean, there are a ton of books, great books for motivation and better ways to like learn things and mastering certain things. And the one thing that she mentioned was that some people, right, or what the author pretty much claims is that some people like to be either, in this case, a generalist or a specialist, right? In consulting, a lot of people raise their hand. They say it's better to be a specialist, right? That's where the money is. When you can, what do they say? The niches, the riches are in the niches, right? But the premise of this book, Strengths Finder, is that you have to find what suits you individually, right? So like if you're a person who is a jack of all trades and you can go fairly deep, right? There are some people in the community, let's say in the SQL Server community, that are very well versed in VMware, right? As well as SQL Server. So they're kind of like a little bit broader, right? In the cloud, Azure. So they're kind of broader and deeper, right? And some people are more kind of narrow, as they say, like 1 inch wide and like 1 mile deep. You really have to find what suits you and your learning style, right? But overwhelmingly, the specialist, again, is what, in the case of consulting, can charge more and also has more business, right? So one discussion I had with the attendees last week was, is it really 1 inch wide, 1 mile deep when it comes to a specialist? Because nowadays, now you have the cloud, for example, Azure, AWS. Let's just stick to Azure because that's what I'm somewhat familiar with. And if anybody knows, they go to azure.com and they look up the services that Azure offers. I mean, the list is just huge, right? So as more people start to adopt the cloud for different services, that 1 inch is not 1 inch anymore. I mean, you might still have to be a mile deep, but it's probably, in my view, going to be expanding to, let's say, half a foot or maybe 12 inches in deep. So you always have to have your mind open as new technologies come in. I'm not saying learn every single thing, but kind of keeping an eye out there for what's, where the trends are going, where big companies like, let's say, Microsoft are putting their money, is also a good indicator of where you should put your focus. By the way, I did mention the 40-some people, excuse me, the 40-some people that I interviewed, that's on my blog. 70% of them say specialist, right? To kind of get a little bit deeper. So a little over 70% of them say specialist. So all this learning, right? So we get these negative thoughts, we turn to positive, and then we are learning and we're starting to learn. And obviously the more that we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know, right? It's just so massively deep that once we start to think negative, like, oh my God, there's just so much to learn. Again, we're going back to the ACE method, right? Analyze the negativity, right? The negative thoughts, convert them and educate, just kind of keep going on the cycle. Once we have that down and we're chugging along and learning and bettering our confidence level, right? And setting that belief system very, very solid foundation, on solid foundation, then that brings me to the second key, and that is, it's okay to not know everything, right? Now, this might seem initially counterintuitive, right? Like, hey man, you're telling me to study and learn this and that, and now it's okay to not know everything? Everything is the key, right? Coming to terms with this truly fosters learning, and understand that no one knows everything. No one knows everything. And if you're like me and you listen to tech podcasts or you go to training events, SQL, specifically SQL Server training events or any other type of event, you'll see that some of the top people in the industry are very humble in the fact that they're first to say, sorry, but I don't know this topic, or I don't know that, or for this you need to go there, right? So not everybody knows everything. It's very, very important to understand that, because all of these build on the foundations, right? So if you start to feel like, oh, I need to learn everything, then your foundation is going to be shaky. So with that being said, and hopefully understood, no one knows everything, but together we know a whole lot. And if you all know Simon Sinek, other great motivational speaker, consultant, author, very good books. I love this quote. This quote to me is, it's, I rarely fill a slide with all these quotes and images and stuff like that, but that one quote really stands out in this session, because if you really think about it, and I do this usually in front of people so I can count how many people are in the room or how many people are watching right now. You think about it, like if we're in the whole virtual room of, let's say, 30 people, 40 people, 50 people, whatever number of people that they are, individually, each person's experiences, whether it's, professional experiences or personal, together we just know a whole lot. I mean, if you actually think about that, that's huge, right? There might be something that a 30-year-old, 35-year-old, I'm 40, right? If there's somebody in here who's 25 or 28, has gone through something I didn't go through, right? Then later on I go through that person can help me out, right? I mean, the knowledge is huge. So just understand that, to look at networking from a different point of view, to look at, friendships, co-workers, right, colleagues from a different point of view is crucial to getting forward, right, to moving forward. So with that, don't hate, collaborate, right? Consider collaboration the new competition, right? It kind of, initially I was also like this, and now that I'm not, I tend to see other people that are, that when you view other people as your possible competition, you're blocking yourself from growth. If you look at it as a collaboration, right, and you want to connect with them, you want to, build a relationship and a connection with them, that for you is better in the long run than having this type of mindset of shutting people off because they are in the same field that you are, right? Or they could potentially take business from you, right? That type of mindset is detrimental for long-term growth. And just to give you a little example, so a lot of clients that I have and work with, since I'm in the DC area, are, you can guess, are in the government space, right? The military clients, stuff like that. So there are certain times where I get approached for just doing one job, and then since I'm there, the client really doesn't know, for example, the limit or the boundary of your experience or knowledge. So they will throw everything at you, right? So like if you're a Microsoft guy, right, then they will just throw, and you're, let's say, a SQL Server expert or a PFE, for example, a Premier Field Engineer, whatever, you go to a client site, then they're going to come to you with like Office 365 issues, SharePoint issues, I got AD issues or whatever. And you might know a little bit of it, right? But not enough to give them a solid piece of information, and the client sometimes doesn't understand that. So in my case, one time I'm there and I'm doing building a failover clustered instance for them, and they hit me with this question about BI stuff. It was like SSRS, like reporting, stuff like that, and I'm not that guy, right? I've dabbed around with it. I've ran a little ad hoc query and then imported into SSRS, but Power BI, all this new stuff out there, no idea. I mean, it would take me a huge learning curve to learn that. So but I do have ex-coworkers, mentors, friends that are heavy in that. So I called them up. I said, hey, I could potentially send business your way, and I just sent it to them, right? And without the expectation of getting anything in return, right? That's the key, is collaboration without expectation of getting anything in return, and it'll come back to you. It will come back. So to go off of the whole notion of collaboration, expanding your network, like this slide right here, we want to utilize what we have to our benefit, right? And I want to kind of talk a little bit about this, utilizing social media like Twitter or Facebook. For me, mainly, and also the SQL Server community. For those who are heavy in SQL Server, they know the SQL family hashtag, SQL help. On Twitter is huge, not so much on Facebook. Facebook seems to be more like personal stuff, but if you're not using Twitter, and it's funny because I ask people usually during the sessions how many people have Twitter, and not that many people raise their hand, which is kind of surprising. But regardless of whatever it is that you do, create a Twitter account. And specifically if you're in the SQL Server community, create a Twitter account and follow a couple people, right, in your area of expertise, let's say in SQL Server, right? And you'll start to, the amount of connections and the positive or positivity you can receive from that are great, right? Priceless. And I'll give you a small example of the benefit of, let's say, using Twitter, for example. So I am stepping outside of my comfort zone. I mean, this is like a real story. So this is the past maybe month or two, I'm stepping outside of my comfort zone of SQL Server. I'm getting into technologies that I've never heard of, like containers or SQL on Linux, right? And container orchestration like Kubernetes, right? So if you're out there and you're a tech geek or you're in SQL Server, you've heard of Kubernetes and containers and all this Microsoft pushing for these technologies. So I was like, hey, I talked to one of my mentors and he suggested I kind of look into it. So I did, took his advice, went to Pluralsight. And if you all don't have a Pluralsight account, I highly recommend it. It is for, I think it's like for like $200 a year, you get unlimited videos, right? So I go to Pluralsight and I look up this one individual who is huge into Docker containers and Kubernetes. I watch his videos. In the video, he mentioned that he has a book coming out, okay? And he said, and he was very friendly in terms of, yeah, you can reach out to me on Twitter, say hi, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, you know what, let me reach him out on Twitter and ask him about the book. And the book came out last month in March. So I said, oh, well, actually May. So like, yeah, about a month and a half ago, his book came out. And I said, I follow him on Twitter. I sent him a message and I said, hey, I wanted to ask you a question. I saw your videos and they were great. Thank you so much for making them. I see you have a book coming out. Now, does the book contain material that is not in the videos that I just saw? Because if so, I want to, I definitely want to purchase it and read it. He says there are 2 chapters in the book that are not in the videos, right? I said, okay, so I'll purchase it. Thanks. Get out of Twitter. Next day, I'm like, let me try this. So I reached back out to him and I said, hey, would you be willing to send me a review copy of your book or a copy of your book? I will review it and I'll post the blog on my site, on my blog, right, for readers to potentially purchase your book. And he said, what's your address, right? So he sent me the book. It's like 2-3 weeks later, I go ahead and publish it. So it's on my blog right now. And I think I have it. Give me 1 second here. This is it. I don't know if you all can see this. The Kubernetes book by Nigel Poulton, right? So I reviewed the book. Book is great. Great examples. There's one question, though, that I just couldn't pick up. Like I was confused about this one thing that he mentioned in the book in the beginning chapter. So I sent him a DM. I said, hey, man, I'm reading the book. I got this question. I asked him the question. He replies back with explicit, not explicit word, but he explicitly describes what he meant, right? And then he apologized for not clarifying in the book. So I said, hey, that's fine. Thank you. But guess what? Now I understand it. I keep going forward, right? And the best thing about going back to the first point up here, utilizing social media, is now I have the book. I didn't have to pay 30 bucks, right? But not only do I have the book, I have connection to the author, right? So if I have any questions, which I will do, right? I will have questions. I go straight to the author and I ask them, right? So to kind of stress, which is not on the slide, but I want to stress this, ask questions. The worst that this guy could have told me, the Nigel could have said was no. All right, I would have bought it, right? But now, if I see him anywhere, he knows me, I know him. If I have any questions, I can connect. In terms of knowledge, I mean, that has pushed me very far ahead. So I highly urge you, ask questions. Any questions, ask. Don't feel shy or embarrassed. Very, very important. Second one down there, attend local meetups. If you're not familiar with meetup.com, I say this to all my sessions, is if there's something you're interested in, and I like to use an example of baking, right? Go to meetup.com, right? I love cookies or whatever it is that you're interested in. Look to see if there's a local group in your area. If not, create one. You might not know there's somebody else that might come along in the future and interested and join your group, and you'll be the founder. You'll be the main person, right? And if there are a group, if there is a group, then you can meet up. They meet up like once a month or whatever. Go up there, introduce yourself, network, right? Expanding your network, get every single person's contact information. Absolutely. Get business cards. You might not necessarily have a business per se, but you can have your name and your email there, and then your Twitter handle or whatever, and give that out. Keep expanding your network doesn't mean expanding your business network. First comes yourself, right? And then the business. You're building relationships and collaborations, right? So definitely do that. And I made an example of if you're looking up on meetup.com, let's say you live far away, you don't have any type of local meetups, create one. And if you can just get, or if you end up getting like 1 or 2 or 3 other people, or maybe even 5 people, and you schedule a meetup and some of them show up, you won. That's it. Like, I mean, again, together we know a whole lot. Never underestimate the knowledge of individual people, right? So you can be looking at the one rock star of, let's say, the SQL Server community, right? And I'll give you an example. Let's say Brent Ozar, right? He's, as an example, is one of the quote unquote rock stars of the community, right? I don't necessarily have to wait to get an answer from Brent. I can, if I have my network, I can go to other individuals, right? I don't have to stand there and wait. And my curiosity for learning is just holding, tick, tock, tick. No. Go reach out to other people. The more you can expand your network, the quicker you can do that. And the last one right here, training events and seminars, huge, huge. Because if you go to some other event or a training event or training seminar where other people have paid money, right? Either their company has paid or they have paid out of their pocket. You're meeting more like-minded people, right? I mean, I'll give you an example. My journey into blogging and then getting into SQL Server more deeply and kind of doing these speaking gigs and stuff like that started at a training event. And if you're familiar with it, SQL Skills has their index, what is it, optimization. I forgot what the acronym is, but the immersion event. The immersion event, I think, is like optimization, performance, tuning, or something like that. I attended their first one a couple years ago. It's like, not even, like 4.5 years ago. And at the event, I met somebody that ended up becoming not only my very good friend and mentor, but kind of guided me and suggested me to start a blog. If I didn't go to that event, I wouldn't have even, and that person, Tim Radney, for those people that know, kind of put me in this path of just, where I'm at now and where I would like to be is kind of this trajectory. And it all happened at a training event. Never underestimate these events. But the goal is, if you ask Tim, every break that we had during the SQL Skills training event was like 4 days, I think it was, like 8 hours a day. Every break we had, like 10 minutes, I would go back to the table where he was sitting and ask him questions. I wasn't just, there's like 20, 30 people in the event, but I kept asking him, and I told him, I said, I hope I'm not bugging you. He's like, nah, man, So don't stop asking questions. Now, we got all that said. The third key, put people and purpose first. This is very, very important, right? So like the first key is you believe in yourself. You got a very strong foundation and you're on this process of just learning this information. Whatever it is, you can do it, right? You got to just do it. Not only just do it mentality, but you have a boundary. You have this system, right? You're using that ACE method and you're learning. Then you get into the understanding that you don't need to know everything. It's okay, right? It's okay to say, I don't know, I'm going to point you in the other direction, right? Third key is we have to put people and purpose first to be successful in consulting or any type of business is not necessarily to provide the right answer per se, but asking the right questions, right? Asking the right questions trumps providing the right answers. You should think about that first, And I used to be like that first. Is you jump in and the business manager or your counterpart starts to kind of tell you the example of what they need or what the problem is, and you kind of jump the gun. You want to prove yourself and you want to kind of go and say, oh, I got it. Oh yeah, just move over. I got it. But that ends up costing a lot of money, and you end up looking like a fool, and most likely will end up with no repeat business, right? So remember that people come first. Jumping into the right solution is a bad idea, right? Focus on the people or the client, then the solution, right? Try to get to know the people, right? Again, saves time and money both for the client and you. And you might be wondering, and in case you are wondering, well, I don't want to save money, I want to make money, right? But you think about it, if consultants kind of have this I guess reputation of charging a lot of money and coming in there and messing things up and this and that. But if you can be that one individual that goes in there, does the job, first qualifies it very good, right? You qualify what they're looking for and what they need. Why is it that you're actually there? And then you kind of come in precisely, you do it. And then let's say something that would take somebody 1 week, you get it done in 8 hours, or you get it done in 2 days, right? You will be called back, right? Empathy, something that is lacking, not only in the entire world, but specifically the IT field, right? There's a lot of competition in the IT field, especially it's like no matter where you look, people always want to kind of talk about themselves, not worry about the other people, show off, hey, look what I did, look what I know, and this and that. When you come across somebody who's empathetic, that person automatically stands out, right? In business, this is very, very important because you don't want to go into a client meeting and kind of qualify information when you're all about talking about yourself, right? Oh, I got this certification, I got this, I'm that, I got you, and then they're sitting there like, I don't care, right? Do you know what their problem is? So understand the client's struggles, past experiences, and pain points. Very, very important. It takes an empathetic type of mindset, right? And I find that to be lacking. I don't know about you, but if you see maybe other people in your area that are kind of quick to jump the gun and interrupt you, and that's not going to be successful. Be empathetic. And if there's issues where, and I know this is hard because sometimes we don't necessarily go through that type of situation, hence empathy, but we have to kind of put ourselves in their shoes. It can be hard. It can be hard, right? But for the sake of business, here's a tip. You go to a client site and they're kind of complaining, right, about the previous consultant that came in, screwed them over for so much money, and now for some reason, because of politics, office politics, they had to get another consultant. So they had this negative like stereotype and this negative view. You're already, the gun is pointing at you already, right? And you haven't even started. But the more you sit back and talk and qualify, it diffuses the situation. I started out in the IT world as tech support back in 2000, and literally picking up the phone and answering tech support calls for UUNet, if you're familiar with the internet, the ISP back in the day. And one of the things was the more that you listen to the customer, the less angry that they get, right? They call initially and they're all pissed off and cursing and yelling and blaming you for everything. And the more that you say, I understand, and you paraphrase what they're saying and you kind of qualify what they really mean, what they're saying, they start to calm down very, very quickly. So EQ over IQ goes without saying. Again, you want to be the focus or impetus on emotional intelligence is key, right? If you're kind of busting the door and trying to show how much you know, you're just pretty much kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So look at it differently and understand that you're trying to read people per se, right? Not the tech. The tech comes in later, or the solution or whatever it is that you're providing, right? And to go off the baking example, if somebody comes in like, I need a cake for my daughter's birthday, you're like, I got it. And you give them a cake, they're like, no, it needs to be shaped like a balloon or whatever, right? So you take the times. Have you ever gone to like my uncle actually used to own a Baskin Robbins. And whenever people would come in, and I would actually go there when I was a teenager, eat the scraps out of like a plastic bucket. But anyway, he would leave like the mint chocolate chip for me. But that's the side thing. And I will look from the back, and I'll see what people will come in to get a birthday cake. There's a big form that they had to fill out, right? What it looked like, the size, and this and that. That's pretty much what you're doing for the client. So Daniel Goleman, this is a great quote. In a high IQ job pool, soft skills like discipline, drive, and empathy mark those who emerge as outstanding. Daniel Goleman is a science journalist and an author, great books. This is huge. Again, putting the focus on empathy. So I have this image here to remind me that it is a story time, and I like to tell a lot of stories. I do have a ton of stories. I'm going to make this quick because it is at running 52 minutes right now. I don't know what time we have, but it should be done fairly quickly. We're wrapping up right now. But I just wanted to share this one example with you to very stress the importance of reading people, right? And that EQ over IQ. So I went to a client site about a year and a half ago, close actually 2 years ago. And I was there for a week. They had me fly in to do some work. I go there Sunday. I fly in Sunday. Monday morning, I go to the building at 8 a.m. I was actually around like 7:45. I go in there. I'm signing in, get my badge and all that. They call my counterpart. He comes downstairs. So how you doing? Shake hands, all this type of stuff. Never seen him before. This was a different state. I've only talked to him. So we go up to the cubes. And he takes me to the cube that I'm going to be working at. And as I'm walking across all these cubes, I see that all the cubes are empty, right? And I'm not talking about empty like there's nobody in there, but there's like pictures of kids and stuff like that. No, there's like nothing. There's the only thing there's like a phone jack. That's it, right? Ethernet cable, nothing else, no monitor, nothing. I'm like, okay, whatever, one of those things that I just picked up and don't really care about. I'm there just to be there for a couple of days and I'm out. So I put on my laptop, I sit down, then my boss goes around to the other cube and sits down. And and the cubes were, if you can see me, the cubes are like to like the shoulder, right? So if I stand up, it look like whack-a-mole, right? So I'm sitting down, and as I'm typing, I think I was typing an email or something. I hear out of my left side, right? So the opposite side of my boss, I hear the other cube. There's a guy sitting there with a headset, and he's talking, but he starts to curse. He starts to drop the F-bomb, and he starts to get very heated. And at the same time, I'm like a little bit curious, like, oh, what the hell's going on here, right? My counterpart pops his head up again like whack-a-mole, like Chuck E. Cheese, boom. And he says, hey, do you want to go catch breakfast? Get some breakfast from downstairs. I'm like, all right, let's go. So we get up, we go downstairs, and as we're going downstairs, mind you, everybody at this location, or the majority of them that I saw, were wearing like t-shirts and shorts and flip-flops, a very like relaxed, cool, chill environment. And I'm there with a charcoal gray suit and a white shirt, no tie, but looking like Robert De Niro in like Heat, just without the goatee. And I noticed people are kind of looking at me funny, right? So we get our breakfast, we sit down, and my counterpart looks at me, he says, oh, by the way, this week they have company-wide layoffs. So I'm sitting there, not even the first bite of food, like, what? Like in my head, you know how they say awkward? This was that. That word was going off in my head. And then he says, which was even more awkward than the first was, he said, I hope when you come here Wednesday, I'm still here. I'm like, oh God, like, I'm like, so what can I say, right? It's an awkward situation. So I said, don't say that or whatever. So we went back upstairs, and fast forward the end of the day, doing my work, whatever. So now I noticed that the guy who was cursing was actually cursing at with his coworker about the other friend of his that got laid off after 20 years of working for the company or whatever. So end of day, I go downstairs. He walks me out because he has to sign me out, give the badge. He turns to me, and this is where it really hit home to me. He looks at me, he says, all right, man, we'll see you tomorrow, whatever. I shake his hand. He said, I'm glad that you came instead of the other guy. You feel like a friend. Like I feel like we've been friends for a while, right? I'm like, oh, it kind of caught me off guard. And I was like, oh, thanks, but I was also kind of curious. I was like, what do you mean about the other guy, right? Like, thanks for the compliment, but what the hell was the other guy like, right? So he said, and he was saying, so we're standing in the lobby, and he says, 3 months ago, they sent the first consultant that came. He just literally walked in, sat in the same spot that you're sitting in, opened up his laptop, head down, and just started working. He was unapproachable, right? He had this kind of like stiff personality that I can't believe my counterpart said this. Excuse me. He said that it kind of scared me that I went back to my cube and I was emailing him tasks to do. And I'm like, you were emailing this consultant from the cube to the left or to the right, right? And you're paying this guy hundreds of dollars an hour, right? Or whatever you're paying him, right? And you can't even go and approach him, right? So two things here. Number one, don't be like that guy, right? That's why I put focus on the empathy and the emotional, right? The EQ over IQ. Don't be the guy who's trying to prove himself technically, right? Number two is you put the client in a hard spot because the database manager is now scared to talk to this person, but I guarantee you the database manager had issues with his boss because his boss, the CTO, whoever it was, is going to be like, I don't care what his personality type is, you better go get blah, 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 and then puts him under stress, right? So that's not good for anybody. That was my story. I just hope that stresses. And to end off with this quote, the most important thing in the communication is to hear what is not being said, by Peter Drucker, who was a business management consultant, author. I believe he passed away, but he has numerous books about EQ and intelligence and stuff like that. Very, very important. Listen to what isn't being said. And by the way, when that guy was telling me the story, you can see that he was kind of reliving the past, but he was also kind of relieved that, hey, now I'm here and I'm not going to be like the other guy and put the stress on him. So I still keep in contact with the guy. So again, the 3 keys recap. Believe in yourself. The ACE method, I've broken it down as easy as possible. It's okay to not know everything. No one does, remember that. And put people and purpose first, EQ over IQ. Thank you very much. I put my upcoming SQL Saturday talk is going to be in Atlanta, Dallas, Baton Rouge, and Sioux Falls. If you care to leave feedback, I would appreciate it. mohammaddarab.com/feedback. There's a quick form. You can just send in your information and feel free to reach out to me on Twitter and my blog right there. So if you're at one of those SQL Saturdays, absolutely come up to me if you want to. Oh, by the way, I guarantee you that each session that I do live is different than the other one. I have stories, so many stories that I kind of, depending on the crowd and whatnot, I just say. So this session and what I said now might not necessarily be the one in one of these sessions. So you can sit in those two and you'll be uniquely surprised. So again, thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. That was fantastic. Just a note for our audience that the session has been recorded and will be posted in the future to the past webinars that are posted on YouTube for the virtual groups. If
Awesome.
you want to keep an eye on our Twitter account, it's pass_profdev, and there'll be an announcement when it goes live. And I'm just seeing if there's any questions. I think there's just some thank yous.
Okay,
there are
cool.
some thank yous. So
awesome. Usually there aren't that many questions unless it's like in person where they kind of play along but mainly it's like, hey, thanks for the motivation, which if there's one key takeaway is be motivated and just keep moving forward. That's it. So
yeah, sounds good. So I am going to stop the recording. So thanks
awesome.
for everybody for tuning in, and thanks so much for speaking to us today.
My pleasure, my honor.